Good afternoon. I'm Professor Dr. Roger Louis Martínez-Davila from the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. It's good to be here with you today. I'd like to thank the 19th International Conference on New Directions in the Humanities, as well as our host, the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, for this invitation and this opportunity to present to you virtually. I am a medieval European historian with an emphasis on Spain. Specifically, my research pertains to Jews and conversos, Jewish converts to Christianity in Spain during the latter Middle Ages. And I consider myself both an archival specialist, having worked in about 50 national, provincial, ecclesiastical, and municipal archives in my career, as well as a paleographic specialist. And especially working with the digital humanities, both with virtual reality work, but also using massive open online courses to train everyday folks to learn how to read medieval Spanish handwriting, the hand, as through my Deciphering Secrets MOOC series on Coursera and previously on edX. So it's great to be here. Let's get started. Today I will be speaking on the immersive global Middle Ages, and specifically, if you've encountered my abstract, this immersive global Middle Ages is about exploring Jewish, Christian, and Muslim life in the city of medieval Plasencia, Spain, which is in the western frontier of Spain alongside of Portugal. In my abstract, as it reads, and just to kind of focus our attention today, reads as such. At the academic intersections of like medievalisms, the many different types of medieval life, multidisciplinary epistemologies, and globalization, we propose that the Middle Ages were not only a Western European Christian experience, but one that was globally interconnected. It was culturally diverse and with many centers of cultural and political authority. Crucial to this invigoration of the study of the medieval globe is this kind of digital turn in scholarship and the applications of digital humanities approaches that present immersive experiences. And this is really using virtual reality as well as different types of devices projected onto goggles like Oculus Rift headsets. And what we've been doing here at the University of Colorado, alongside of colleagues at other institutions, is recreating kind of like these medieval worlds where kind of there's the interconnectivity. Now, certainly, if we're thinking about the global Middle Ages, we're thinking about other places than Europe. We're thinking about Africa, Asia, the Americas, obviously the Levant, and Oceania. And in this context, what I'm looking at is specifically is diversity within Europe. Really this kind of interconnection of Jewish and Christian and Muslim lives, especially during the 14th and 15th centuries. Now, one of the pieces that is really interesting, I believe, is this concept of how different kind of ecclesiastical centers of control, different cities in Spain, really were a reflection of their communities. And that as we examine the relationships between communities, we don't fall into these traditional tropes, which is Muslims and Jews and Christians all had a mutual distaste and dislike for each other. That in fact, when we look at the facts on the ground, there is a level of kind of interconnectivity that is required of communities to survive, to prosper. And what better way to do this and to kind of experience it than to walk into an immersive world and view this place as it existed and no longer exists today. So what we've been doing is really using a product that is created by Trimble.com, which is called SketchUp Pro. And I've actually taught this in my university courses to undergraduate students as a way of designing and modeling virtual cityscapes. And specifically during spring 2021, even during the global pandemic, I was able to instruct a group of students of about 15 in using this SketchUp Pro technology, not so that it would overtake the specific like classroom where we're studying history, but integrate it in and then to test new tools. And in essence, what we're really trying to do is generate these realistic cityscapes and historic communities. And also, and what you'll see today are just different elements really of my work and my students' work. So this is important, in many ways in the humanities, we have to figure out ways of extending our resources. And one of those resources is our students and our colleagues, as opposed to large grants from the European Commission or the National Endowment for the Humanities. So specifically, we'll see, one or two digital dioramas, this kind of classic element of museums across the world, but now in this new world of digital life. And what I think is important to appreciate is that as we move along in history and in terms of writing history and examining history, we always start with our primary sources. And in this case, all the resources that you'll see that are generating this world are derived from Cathedral of Placencia manuscripts, as well as the Archivo Municipal of the city, as well as other secondary scholarship that's been produced by many great scholars over time. So certainly there's some historic imagination here, but also it is directly tied to those sources that we really focus on in the historical fields. And I think in the long run, what we might see is that immersive worlds really are, in some senses, a new kind of historical representation that is maybe similar or equal to the book, to the text. And we'll see how this develops. And what's interesting is we see the choices we have to make along the way, and how do we want to be, completely consistent and transparent in our work, as well as communicating that knowledge to others around us. So what we can appreciate is the benefits of the historical record. And what we're looking at this moment is actually the University of Salamanca Plano de Plasencia. It's manuscript 2650, and it was actually generated by a medical student at the University of Salamanca in the late 16th century. It's actually the only kind of orthographic image we have of the city. And as you can see, we have the river Jerete running around the community, as well as the location of the castle over here, the cathedral, the prominent city plaza, and then other major structures. What's interesting about the Middle Ages, especially in Spain, is we do tend to have demarcations of cities. So this region right here that you'll see F, H, and E, these sections were all inside of what was the typical judería, or the Jewish quarter of the city. Additionally, we would have a Muslim quarter over here. And then finally, kind of an ecclesiastical quarter, and then a newer section of the city, all of it enclosed by walls. So what do we know about the city of Plasencia? And I'm just going to read from text here from my book, and just to kind of present, what was the city like? So Plasencia is located in the rocky and oak-covered Spanish province of Extremadura, a territory formerly known as the Roman and Visigothic region of Lusitania. It was a hub of social and commercial life in the northern portion of the province. To the north was the university city of Salamanca. To the east was Toledo on the Tajo River. To the south was the ancient Roman city of Merida, and to the west lay Portugal. Placentinos, this community, tended to perceive themselves as inheritors of the Roman and Visigothic tradition. But as we can appreciate, with the Islamic invasion of the Iberian Peninsula in 711, we know that Muslims came to dominate this region already by 713, just 2 years after the invasion by Tariq and Musa, as well as all the way into 1189. So there's really a good almost 500 years of Islamic influence. It wasn't really until the 1189 to 1196 that the city was reconquered by the Christians, by the Castilians, and specifically under Alfonso VIII. The city was then, kind of refounded. It received a proper fuero, or city charter. And what we know about the city at that initial stage in 1188 is what was it like. And so we do have from 1188 a royal donation of property from the king to Pedro Tajarbor, who was an archpriest of Avila and an archdeacon of Plasencia, just 1 year before its kind of reconstitution. He writes that the city was quite limited in its resources, and he described it as this: I encountered a dam at Plasencia on the Jerete River, situated close to the city's gate of Santa Maria. The city's dam was intact in its totality, and it had a watermill and aqueducts constructed there. You, King Alfonso VIII, also made a donation of an ancient church in the city. We found the undisturbed church where the ancient city was first established. So what we can appreciate from this moment is that there was probably some damming in this location here or here. The watermill was in this vicinity here, and you can even see some of these depictions of it. And probably the oldest city that we have, oldest church, in the city was actually located here in the Judería, which is the Church of San Nicolas. What is quite interesting about the city is that it is walled, but the nature of its population, and this is why it is probably so interesting. So as of the year 1400, we do have some initial tax records from the church, the Diocese of Plasencia, that indicated about 34% of the population was Christian, 42% was Jewish, and a remaining 24% was Muslim. We believe that the population of the city, according to Luis del Toro, in the 1400s, might have been about 800 to 1,000 souls. So it was quite a compact city, but most importantly, even though kind of dominated politically by a Christian king, really its livelihood was driven by this 42% of the Jewish population, of the population that was Jewish, as well as this traditional Muslim population that was there as well, more involved in agricultural activities and carpentry and that type of work. So we can begin to kind of like examine the city by looking at old topographical maps and plans that were drawn through the period. And through this, we can establish the location of a now destroyed castillo, and also kind of establish where the main water well was that provided water into the city and just the respective zones. Again, this is the zone that is considered the Judería, and where we're going to spend most of our time today, in addition to a little bit of the cathedral. What's important to realize, and why we want to use kind of these virtual environments, is that we can recreate worlds that no longer exist today. And so we do know that the synagogue of Plasencia was destroyed in the late 1400s after the Duke of Plasencia, or the Count of Plasencia, the Estraniga family, destroyed the synagogue and constructed a very large kind of like family home castle here. And the other pieces that we can see through kind of like hydrological studies is also elements of water. So this is the Central Plaza. San Nicolas right here is where we would find the original old church that I described to you. And then we can follow these waterways. This vicinity where of San Nicolas was the church, which is right here, was right across the street from the synagogue, which my students and I started to recreate based off historical resources. Importantly, this is where actually the digital process and investigation really allows us to understand how a city operated. In this respect, we were able to identify, and specifically a student of mine, Gavin Rogers, was able to identify actually that the water source, there's another water source that flowed into the city and provided water for the ritual mikveh, the ritual washing center for washing for Jewish Sabbath. So the process of designing a medieval world actually helps us to appreciate it as an analytical tool. Continuing along, we don't actually have any record really of the synagogue other than some archaeological digs, but it's now covered by what used to be the monastery dedicated to San Vicente Ferrer, who was an aggressive proselytizer of Jews in the late 1300s. So it's a particularly kind of distasteful history, because right where the synagogue is a monastery now defunct that was honoring the individual that was aggressively proselytizing them. So what we do know is that actually that the synagogue of Cathedral in Portugal held a very similar kind of ritual place for protection of the Ark, the Torah. And in this case, you can see this depiction. So these are the things that we can start to do, is that we know there's some historical record that establishes that, through eyewitness accounts that, we do think, where the Ark was stored, where the Torah was stored, was very similar to this Portuguese influence. We're in very close proximity to Toledo, so there's good evidence potentially to argue that the structure might have shared characteristics either with Santa Maria la Blanca and Toledo, or also the El Tránsito Synagogue and Museum today, which was founded by the Levy family of Toledo and also Burgos. Interesting enough, this particular city during the early 1400s was governed by ecclesiastically and politically by the Carvajal and Santa Maria family confederation. The Santa Marias were the direct descendants and the first converts from the levies into the Catholic Church. So we also have some circumstantial evidence that suggests that not only was the synagogue connected to the Levy family, but more importantly, that this is a kind of a continuous Jewish community that is operating in different regions. So this is one piece that we can look at. So now we can really kind of dive into, and I'm going to just check time, we can dive into some of the elements here. This is actually the SketchUp Pro modeling program. And what is so interesting about it is that it allows us to import geographic information and actually recreate the topography of the city as it existed. This zone here is actually the judería. This is the plan for where the major cathedral would be located. And then you can see as we move around here, this is San Nicolas Church and then the judería. So what we can start to see is like, how did the city kind of function and start to design a city in that way? I'm going to start to turn on some filters for you to see. So here is the judería, and I'm going to turn on some base buildings. So now what you start to see is the original city walls of the community. And you'll see, like, as this is redrawing the image, it'll take out some of the coloring. The actual brickwork or rock work we incorporated were actually from photographs that I took in the city as I've been working there for about 15 years, and actually using those textures. And surprisingly, what you can do is using Google Maps today, as well as Google Earth, can calculate the locations of and project onto this location not only the topographic features of the city, but also where the city walls are. And you can reconstruct them so that you can see as they appeared. And what you'll see here now, this is where San Nicolas Church was. And then also this is the location of the synagogue. The first piece I kind of just wanted to show you was the potential of this as a teaching tool, as an experiential tool. So one of the pieces we know from the historical record, and this is using the traditional architecture, the vernacular architecture of the region. So it is this kind of rock and filled wood structure. But we can start to tell stories, digital dioramas, about what this community was like. And instead of, even though I do work with modeling of avatars, it's quite a high bar to reach. So here we can tell a diorama of, in the 1410s, Yusuf Castaño, sorry, there's no Enye there, was both Jewish and a respected chainmail maker and weaponsmith who supplied Christian knights. His home and workshop was located in this area. So we can kind of showcase in this way how, people lived, what was the nature of their living arrangements, where they worked, and really kind of showcase this history of religious interaction. That, if you trust a Jew to make your armor, I think there's probably quite a bit of mutual respect there. One last piece I kind of wanted to show you about the benefits of using also something like SketchUp Pro. Not only is it relatively easy to model in, and again, these are houses that I just model myself. I'm not a particularly sophisticated modeler, and then I'll show you some of my students' work in a minute. But then also, what we can do is we zoom out, and as you can imagine, if you put on an Oculus Rift headset to walk through the environment, then you can really have a good feel for this. The other thing that we can do is we can start to actually add visual effects like fog, so you have a sense of the environment. And most importantly, I think, is you actually have the opportunity to add in shadowing, which is different times of the day will obviously appear as different elements of life. So this kind of facilitates different kind of ways of experiencing the area. So this is at night, then early morning, and then as we get through the full of the day, and then at the long end of the day. And so by geolocating your actual site, you can really kind of place what does it feel like at those times. So I'm not going to save this time because we had a little snafu previously, and we'll make sure that we move on to the next one. The next piece was just to show you also that we can recreate places as they no longer exist today. So specifically the Cathedral Placencia was reconstructed in the early 1500s, and the original site was really transformed. So we did have a proper cloister, a special capilla that was created by a different churchman during, I think, the 12th and 13th centuries. And then this section of the church was actually lost because it was destroyed so that they could enhance the next generation of the structure, which is quite different. We can take a look at real quick now. So I'm going to turn on what are called tags. And tags, I'll move this into our screen, allows us to kind of actually also see what's there and what's not there. Another kind of benefit of this technology. And so you can start to see, as I start to turn on different elements, how working in different elements, you can build out a particular structure and reimagine it the way it existed at that time. And I will be posting some of these records files online so you can see them. But again, what we can appreciate is like what was the scale of the structure, and by placing individuals in terms of a digital diorama, we can tell important stories about religious life here. For example, the Carvajal-Santa María family established a very specific set of memorial masses roughly in the 1450s to 1470s that allowed them to kind of commemorate the family's lives and what they did. And specifically, a memorial mass was said in the name of Sarah de Carvajal, who was the mother of the Cardinal Juan de Carvajal. And the mass was said here over her grave, and specifically of an image of Mary and the Christ child looking down at her. So as you can see, what we'll do is start to add in text, add in elements of the environment so that we can tell those stories and experience them in a way that is impossible today. The last piece of work that I really wanted to showcase today was just really quickly, and this was my cover image, was the recreation of the synagogue. All of this work really is the work of my students as undergraduates and one graduate student. And we started to draw upon, well, how do we show what was religious life like. So whether that this is the platform where the Torah would be read and using these generic avatars to actually, as you remember, I'm going to scroll in, the Ark for the Torah. And this is, again, is a replica of one that was in Portugal. The students were so good at this work that also, if we can zoom in, they actually made artifacts like this yad or a Torah pointer that allows you to kind of like, and this is a replica of a specific one that is a Sephardic yad from the 15th century or 16th century. Again, kind of showing how we can incorporate like historical research, museum studies, and virtual reality to create a perspective. And I'm just going to stop here, let the image catch up. It'll be in just a second. So again, using the kind of like very much so like the Santa Maria la Blanca synagogue, using that kind of art structure. And then as we can appreciate, Mudahar art and architecture is very much so in vogue during this time period, recreating those kinds of elements. So you would see this type of decoration, the ornamentation of the windows, very similar that you might see in El Tránsito synagogue. But again, this site no longer exists. And so in this way, in the same way when we write a text, sometimes we're interpreting the evidence that we have and trying to tell the story. Well, I think what we're trying to do with this immersive global Middle Ages kind of idea is like, well, let's use a new way of writing, which is the digital modeling, to tell a story. And then, alongside of text, alongside of like experiential walking through environments, we can perceive what life was like and where people were and what they were doing with their lives. It's just another tool for analytical as well as representational components of history telling. So thank you for this opportunity to present to you today. Sorry for these little technical snafus. As always, it's always a lot of fun to work with technology. Y'all have a great afternoon, and thank you very much.